miles and be composed of solid quail 2 cubits, or about 36 inches high. If each quail had consumed about 27 square inches, there would be 29 trillion quail, or about 12 million quail per Jew. More than a cubic mile of quail would be involved. This would be enough quail to fill 40 million railroad boxcars, forming a train about 350,000 miles long, long enough to reach around the earth at the equator about 14 times. 6. Another historical problem is in Deuteronomy 2:14, in which Moses says, quote, 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea, that is when they left going across the Red Sea, until they crossed the Zered Valley. By then, that entire generation of fighting men had perished from the camp as the Lord had sworn to them, unquote. We're supposed to believe that all of Moses' 600,000 fighting men died within 38 years after they left Egypt, and only Moses was left. He had to have survived, because he's the one allegedly writing this verse. 7th, Moses made a statement 38 years after the covenant was made at Sinai, and after thousands of Israelites had wandered in the wilderness for the same period. In Deuteronomy 5:3 he said, quote, the Lord made not this covenant, he's talking about the covenant at Sinai, with our fathers, but with us, that meaning the Israelites, who were all, notice he says, all of us here alive this day, unquote. Not one person out of 3 million members of the Exodus had died in that 38-year period of wandering. And to compound this nonsense, Deuteronomy 2:14 in the prior problem said all the fighting men had perished. 8th, Deuteronomy 7:1 says, quote, when the Lord your God brings you, he's talking about the Israelites, into the land you are entering to possess, and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God delivered them over to you, and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. If this is added to Deuteronomy 7:7, which says, quote, the Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than the other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. When these two are combined, we face an absurdity. If each of these 7 nations had more members than the 3 million Israelites, then the Israelites defeated a combined force of more than 21 million people, 7 times its size. In addition, imagine 20 million people, these 7 tribes, living in Palestine, an area that it currently encompasses no more than 5 million people. 9th, another historical absurdity emerges when we combine Joshua 6:3-4, which says, quote, march around the city of Jericho once with all the armed men. Do this for 7 days, unquote. When we combine that with Joshua 6:15, which states, quote, on the 7th day they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, unquote. There were over 600,000 men in the Israelite army, and many observers have asked how that many men could have gone around a city 7 times in that day and age, and do it in 1 day. 10th, a population problem diametrically opposed to what we have discussed so far becomes obvious when we read 1 Kings 20:15, which says, quote, so Ahab Ahab summoned the young officers of the provincial commanders, 232 men. Then he assembled the rest of the Israelites, 7,000 in all, unquote. 7,000? How could the Israelites have been the chosen people when they went from over 3 million people at the time of the Exodus to 7,000 in the days of Ahab? 11th, 2 Chronicles 13:3 says, quote, Abijah set the battle in array with an army of valiant men of war, 400,000 chosen men. Jeroboam also set the battle in array against him with 800,000 men, unquote. All of these soldiers were Jews. All lived in Palestine, a poor, miserable little country about 1/4 the size of New York State. Yet 1.2 million soldiers were put in the field. This would have required a population of 10 to 12 million people, which would have been absurd for a country that could barely have supported 2 million. 12. 2 Chronicles 13:17 says, quote, There fell down slain of Israel 500,000 chosen men, unquote. 500,000 killed? If this is correct, it ranks as one of the greatest massacres in world history. At Gettysburg, the greatest battle of the American Civil War, the defeated army lost fewer than 5,000 men, 1/100th the number slain, the number of slain Israelites. 13th and lastly, 2 Chronicles 17:14-18 says, quote, Their enrollment by families was as follows. Adnah the commander with 300,000 fighting men. Next, Johanan, the commander with 280,000. And next to him, Amaziah with 200,000 mighty men of valor. From Benjamin, Eliada, a valiant soldier with 200,000 men. And next to him, Jehozabad, with 180,000 men armed for battle, unquote. In other words, a total of 1,160,000 men were serving the king, besides those he stationed in the fortified cities throughout Judah. How on earth could they possibly have assembled an army of 1,160,000 men in that area? In summary, from a numerical historical perspective, biblical history has more than its share of incredibles. Far too often, mythology replaced reality. The liberal wing of Christianity seeks to escape from many of these absurd accounts in biblical history by admitting they are mythological or fictitious. Liberals readily concede many events are unrealistic, but contend Christians are under no obligation. Many events are unrealistic, but contend Christians are under no obligation to believe these myths as long as the essential teachings of the Bible remain unaffected. From their perspective, it's the central message that counts, not a multitude of historical details. Essentially, this is the same arguments that is used in reference to biblical inerrancy. What difference does it make if biblical details are inaccurate, as long as the central message is true? At least that's the question they ask. What they fail to realize, of course, is that facts are crucial to the entire issue and go to the heart of the matter. As we have said so often, how do you know what's true when you begin to admit certain parts are false? Where do you draw the line? Lawyers build their cases on facts and details. That's the meat and potatoes of their business.